There are stories that do not whisper, but roar across history. Stories that do not ask for permission, but demand to be heard. John Walker's story is one of them. A tale carved, not from villainy, but from the raw, desperate ache of a nation, trying to remember who it was. He rose not as a beacon, but as a mirror. And what he reflected was not the dream, but the cracks beneath it. He wore the shield with trembling hands and iron will. A man forged not by ideals, but by expectation. By the unbearable need to be something more than mortal. Every step he took was heavier than the last. Every smile stretched tighter across a soul, fraying at the edges. Every victory felt more like survival than triumph. In the shadow of giants, he was always meant to fail, but it was never failure that defined him. It was the endless struggle to measure up. To carry a legacy not made for broken men. The shield gleamed under the weight of 1,000 unseen battles. Battles he fought not against enemies, but against the suffocating silence of never being enough. There is something tragic in the way a dream can curdle into a weapon. Something haunting in the way hope can turn brittle beneath the weight of fear. John Walker was not a corruption of the symbol. He was the symbol made flesh, made fallible, made to bleed. And when the world recoiled from him, it was not just him they rejected, but the uncomfortable truths he forced them to face. Grief clings to stories like his, because they are reminders of our own fragility. Reminders that heroes are not born, they are broken and reforged in ways that leave scars. Reminders that strength without reflection can become tyranny wrapped in patriotism. John Walker did not fall because he was evil. He fell because the ground beneath him was already cracked and crumbling. In this video, we will unravel how John Walker became the perfect villain for a broken America. We will explore the forces that shaped him, the fears that consumed him, and the tragedy that made his fall not an accident but an inevitability. Because sometimes the worst monsters are not created in darkness, but in the blinding light of a dream gone wrong. There was a time when the shield meant something pure, when it stood for courage, sacrifice, and hope against impossible odds. But after the blip, the world was not the same. It was fractured, afraid, and desperate for heroes who could fix what had been broken. And into that uncertainty stepped John Walker. He was everything the government thought they needed. Decorated, disciplined, polished enough to sell a story that people wanted to believe. But underneath the surface, there were cracks forming. Cracks that no amount of ceremony or medals could hide. Cracks that grew wider with every heavy footstep he took toward an impossible ideal. America was not looking for a man to inspire them. They were looking for someone to avenge them. Someone to give their anger a face and a name. John Walker became that face, not because he was evil, but because he was exactly what a fearful nation created. A mirror held up to a country that did not know what it stood for anymore. There was a quiet tragedy woven into his ascent. A slow unraveling of a man who truly believed he was doing the right thing. But belief without reflection can turn righteous intentions into reckless destruction. And John Walker never paused long enough to see the difference between the two. From the very beginning, his story was not about villainy. It was about the heavy burden of symbols and the way they twist under the weight of human flaws. And the more he tried to live up to an impossible image, the more he became a reflection of everything America was struggling to admit about itself. There is a kind of fury that grows in silence. A slow, burning frustration that festers when expectations outpace reality. John Walker wore the stars and stripes with pride, but pride without patience is a dangerous thing. Every accolade he earned felt smaller against the backdrop of a world that refused to love him the way it loved Steve Rogers. He was handed a legacy that no one truly believed he could honor. He was asked to stand tall while whispers tore him apart behind closed doors. He was thrust into the light, only to be devoured by shadows. And every polite smile, every hollow cheer, chipped away at the man underneath the armor. John Walker wanted so badly to be enough. Enough for the people who doubted him. Enough for the government that crowned him. Enough for a broken nation that craved easy answers to hard questions. But want alone cannot mend what is already shattered. And every time he failed, the rage inside him grew louder. Frustration turned to resentment, and resentment to recklessness. He stopped trying to be the symbol they wanted, and started becoming the weapon they deserved. He lashed out, not because he was weak, but because he was made to believe that strength was his only value. And when strength was not enough, he reached for brutality instead. There is a sorrow that comes from recognizing yourself in something you wish you could deny. John Walker was not an accident. He was not a betrayal of the American dream. He was the American dream twisted by fear, by anger, by the need to dominate rather than uplift. He was a reflection that no one wanted to look at too closely. After the blip, the world had lost its innocence. Grief had hardened into bitterness, and hope had curdled into suspicion. John Walker did not create that bitterness. He simply carried it forward on his shield. Every brutal act he committed was not just his failure, it was the failure of the ideals he was supposed to protect. The blood on his hands was not just his own. It belonged to every choice that prioritized strength over compassion, dominance over diplomacy. It belonged to every silent nod of approval when violence was easier than understanding. It belonged to a legacy that had long since forgotten what it was meant to stand for. Walker's fall was not a descent into madness. It was a descent into reality. A reality where good men are broken by impossible standards. Where heroes are demanded to be flawless, but punished when they fall short. Where the dream is not a shining light, but a flickering candle battling the wind. And as he knelt over the body of the man he killed, John Walker was not just mourning his victim. He was mourning the death of the hero he thought he could be. The death of the America he thought he was fighting for. The death of a dream that had never truly existed. There is something awe-inspiring about the way power can consume. The way it can build myths faster than it builds monuments. John Walker stood before the world as the new Captain America, but it was a role that demanded more than strength. It demanded soul, sacrifice, and an unshakable moral compass. Things no serum could ever forge. For a moment, it seemed like he might hold it together. Like the weight of the shield might mold him into something worthy. But the illusion of control is seductive and deadly. And John Walker was never trained to resist it. He was trained to win, to dominate, to survive. And when survival became the only goal, everything else withered away. Even the most broken figures are not beyond redemption. Even the ones who stumble, fall, and drown beneath their failures can still find a way to reach for something better. John Walker's story did not end with blood on the shield. It pivoted. It fractured. It began again in the shadows. Stripped of the title he could not uphold, John Walker was forced to face the truth of who he had become. Not a hero in shining armor, but a man still capable of making choices. And sometimes redemption is not found in grand gestures, but in the quiet decisions made when no one is watching. He stepped back into the fight, not as Captain America, but as something else. Something raw and unpolished and human. He saved lives, not because it would win him forgiveness, but because it was the right thing to do. And in those moments he was closer to being a hero than he had ever been with the shield in his hands. Hope clings to figures like John Walker, because they remind us that redemption is messy and painful and never guaranteed. It is not a prize handed out to the worthy, but a journey carved by those who refuse to stay broken. He stumbled, he fell, but he got back up, and chose to be more than the mistakes that defined him. In a world eager to label villains and heroes with sharp lines, John Walker's story reminds us that humanity does not live in absolutes. It lives in the struggle to be better, even after we have lost everything. In the end, John Walker was not a failure of character, but a failure of expectation. He was a man asked to embody a myth he could never live up to. A man who believed in a dream only to be shattered by its impossible demands. A man who still chose to keep fighting, even after the world had turned away from him. His tragedy is not in the blood he spilled, but in the dream he tried to carry. A dream too heavy for any one man to bear. A dream that demanded perfection from someone who was only ever human. And in the breaking of that dream, we see the breaking of a nation that asked too much and gave too little. John Walker's story is a warning carved into the bones of history. A reminder that symbols are not enough to heal wounds left too deep to name. That heroes cannot be manufactured in laboratories or committee rooms. That real strength comes not from supremacy, but from humility. He was never meant to be a villain in the traditional sense. He was meant to be a reflection, a reminder that the line between savior and destroyer is thinner than we dare admit, and that without reflection, even the noblest intentions can spiral into catastrophe. John Walker was the perfect villain for a broken America, because he was not born from hatred. He was born from hope, twisted by fear. And in that twisted hope, we find the most tragic truth of all.